And get us live, of course.
Yeah, I did that first. That was what took me a second. Thank you. We are rolling and we are recording and on YouTube. So we'll do roll call now. Chair Wojciechowski.
Here.
Vice Chair Stevens.
Here.
Commissioner Scott.
Here.
Commissioner Hammond.
I am here and unmuted.
Thank you. Commissioner Rowden.
Here.
Commissioner Bockert. I gotcha. Commissioner Rubis.
Here.
Alternate Adams. Does anyone see the irony that he is not here this evening?
Yeah,
Alternate Quarternick.
Here.
Commissioner Boyle. Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Jelani.
Here.
Okay, well, this is the third Zoom meeting we've had. Thanks for everybody attending. It's good attendance, I'd say. And we're all healthy, so it looks like. So without further ado, I'll seek a motion to approve the minutes of the Historic Preservations meeting from June 25th, 2020.
I move we accept the minutes.
Jan motion, second by
I'll second.
I'll second. Oh, you got it.
Michael had his hand up first, so we'll say Michael. Yes. So all in favor? And comments on the minutes first. Okay.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All the minutes are approved.
Thank you.
4 is the election of officers for the 2020 to 2021 commission year. We didn't form a committee. I guess sometimes we do that. Most of the time, we just nominate people at our meetings like this. Joe, do you want to go into any details about making motions or volunteers, or I guess normally we take a motion or we nominate people and then you have to accept it, of course, and then we vote on them.
Actually, Mr. Chair, to try to follow our bylaws as close as possible, I was going to offer the suggestion that by motion and voice vote, we keep the current slate of officers through the rest of this year, which is approximately 3 meetings. And then at the November 2020 meeting, we'd form the committee. And then in January 2021, we'd actually install the new officers if the slate were to change. So given that it's so late in the year, it just seemed like, why don't we just carry on for the short bit we have and then follow the bylaws as we move into 2021.
It sounds reasonable to me. Any other discussion from anybody?
I move we accept that recommendation.
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor to keep the same cast of characters?
Aye.
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 Aye, aye, Captain.
You didn't ask if anybody was willing to stay on as that, but that's okay.
No, we're not giving you anybody that chance. We're in. That gets us to the end of the year, and we'll form a committee in December.
Well, typically we don't meet in December since it's during that week of time between Christmas and New Year. So I would suggest we form it in November, and then they could meet sometime in December and then present a slate in January as required.
Sounds good.
Thank you all.
So in November, we'll form that committee. Okay, public comment.
So we didn't receive any in advance, but we do have quite a few people in the attendees panel. Some I know are with different petitions and some I assume are here to hear Ms. Fox's presentation. But Travis and I would ask that if anyone who is in the attendee side of the meeting, if they do want to speak, if you could use the raise hand feature. So we'll give you a minute to do that if you're here to just make a public comment for the meeting.
Okay, so we have four items on our ready for action for new business, and one is a presentation by Karen Fox of the WILWOOD Historical Society on one-room schoolhouses in WILWOOD. And I just read your book over the last, well, it's been a few months now, but it was a great book and a really easy read. And on bike rides all the time, I know a lot of the schoolhouses to look for, and one's on Melrose that I always ride by. So it's just raised my awareness more. And I think that's what a lot of people will get out of the book and out of your talk tonight. So
Thank you.
it's all yours.
Oh, okay. So first of all, thank you for having me. This has been such a joy to work on. The book was published in 2016, and I go out and I speak a lot to different groups, but we've got a lot to cover. So I'm going to just jump in. I'm going to share my screen. And how does that look to everybody? Good?
Good.
Looks good.
Okay. So I saw the agenda tonight. I know you have a lot to cover, so I'm going to try to be somewhat quick. I've planned about 30 to 40 minutes, and then there'll be time for Q&A. And just a reminder, if you do have questions, I'll take them at the end. And if you don't want to forget them, maybe jot down a note, or you can add in the chat feature at the bottom. You could just go ahead and shoot out your question, and we'll take those at the end. So when you talk about early education and one-room schoolhouses in the area that is now WILWOOD, it's really important to understand where the first villages were. So I'm going to start with the oldest one that we're aware of, and St. Andre was situated in what is now northern WILWOOD. It was established in 1798 by the Spanish government. So this was Spanish territory at the time. And most of the people that moved here were American veterans. They had served in the Revolutionary War. A lot came here. They came to this part of the country because they wanted free land and they wanted no taxes. So you can see right there, that's a current municipality map. It gives you the general feeling of where it was. There were about 400 people living here from the very beginning. And these were mostly Protestant families coming from the Upper South and Pennsylvania that settled here. So this is a map. We have it in the museum. It's from 1797, and it shows all of the people that settled here during that really first migration of Americans. These are almost exclusively all Americans. The village of St. Andre is shown there where the red star is. This map was drawn in 1797 by James McKay, who was the commandant. The reason I'm going into all of this is we do have a lot of information about how education functioned, and this is prior to the Louisiana Purchase. A lot of these Americans were sending their children to boarding school. And we can look at the data on Lawrence Long. His original land grant is in Chesterfield, but his descendants really came down into what is now WILWOOD. So we can see Lawrence Long Estate in 1805 is paying for the boarding of 2 children. And we don't really know where that is, but we do know that he's paying boarding for each child. It's about $2 a month. We have more data on his son, Gabriel Long, and Gabriel took over the mill. There was a mill it's situated in Chesterfield, but they also had a distillery and a salt plant and a tannery. So this was a really big operation. And his children are being sent to boarding school in Florissant. And we know that it's probably a Catholic school, and the Longs were probably not Catholic, but that was the best option that they had at the time. So who lived here? I'm talking about these are Americans, but they're about 400 in 1799. A quarter of them are enslaved. Then by 1850, you have a lot of things that have happened. There's been a huge wave of a migration of Americans coming into the Louisiana Purchase. And then you also have a lot of Germans that are immigrating, and they come in large numbers in the 1830s and 1840s. And then following the Civil War, you still have a large African-American population living in the area. And then it drops down from 1910 and continuing after that. And a lot of this is caused by the Great Migration of African-Americans moving from rural areas into more, moving into cities where they have more opportunity for education and also for work. The reason I bring all this up is because it affected where the schoolhouses would be and what type of schoolhouses there would be in the area that is now Wildwood. So the question is, how is this education funded? Because the property tax system that we have in place now, that didn't come along until after the Civil War. So the question is, how did they fund all of the schools that they were going to be building? This is a map you're looking at from 1838, and it's Wildwood. It's really the southern part of Wildwood. The red circle there is not where the school is, it's just the land that is going to support the school expenses. You see Fox Creek is in the lower left corner. The upper right corner of this map from 1838 is really the pond in the Grover area. So you can see that a lot of the land has not been sold yet. But there's a plan in place, and this was set up by Thomas Jefferson in the land ordinances. It was meant for the expansion and the growth in the United States, that there was going to be a plan on how schools would be funded. And they would be funded by the revenue from that specific section. It's always called Section 16 within a township district. So this is 36 sections, and this was considered a township, and the funds received from either the rent, the lease, or even the sale of that section of land would fund all of the schools in that area. So this is a map that it's in the book, but we also have it kind of in a larger scale in the museum. But it shows you where all of the schools were located, and it represents 150 years. So the map in the background you're seeing is Merrimack Township, which is really the kind of the original name for this area. People would say they were from Merrimack Township. And it was also kind of a legal description too, as far as where they paid their taxes and whatnot. But there were over 28 schools throughout this 100+ year period. On the map, you can kind of see we've highlighted the Black schoolhouses, and they're an example of schools that didn't come along until after the Civil War. So this is a map that's in the collection, and it's really a great resource because it is a blueprint of the school district boundaries in 1919. On the upper left, you can see the entire St. Louis County. There were about 150 one-room schoolhouses in the county. And at that time, the entire county was extremely rural. I've zoomed in here. This is the westernmost part of St. Louis County. Most of this is now in Wildwood. At the time, it was called Merrimack Township. And you can see each school is called a district, even though it was just one little structure and there were, dozens of children attending, but they called them districts. So I want to feature the Bonhomme Schoolhouse. It's situated in Chesterfield in the Bottoms, now, the big shopping area that you're all familiar with. And even though it's not in technically Wildwood, it's very close to the boundary. Many of the children that attended here would have lived in what is now northern Wildwood. And the Bonhomme Schoolhouse was located on a road that led to the ferry, which was really the only way to get across the river in this part of northern Wildwood. And the ferry was called the Lewis Ferry, and then it's changed to the Howell Ferry. But what this picture represents is one of the oldest schools in our area. And you can see this, it was photographed in 1880, and it's very crowded. There are a lot of families standing out front. The school closed in 1952, and an interesting little tidbit about the school is it became a tavern shortly after that. So, and it was a very popular tavern. Many people that lived in what is now Northern Wildwood went to this tavern. And then during the Great Flood of 1993, the structure was really kind of destroyed and it had to eventually be demolished. But when you're talking about the oldest school that we know of, the oldest schoolhouse that existed in what now is Wildwood, it is the Bacon Schoolhouse. And it's situated near the historic village of Kelp. You can see this is a current map for the city of Wildwood, and I've circled it on there. The physical site is described, so we know the general location of it, although we haven't found any remnants of it. It was donated by the Bacon family. They were a very large family. There were 4 brothers that came here from Virginia prior to the Louisiana Purchase, and they settled throughout Wildwood. They were very strong supporters of education, and this schoolhouse dates to about the 1820s. We know it continued in place for a very long time. The Bacon family members actually sold property to the Kelp family, and then the Kelp community becomes established. What's unique and interesting about this family is that they were neighbors of Thomas Jefferson, and they came here before the Louisiana Purchase. So you can kind of imagine that they were writing back saying how great this area is. Go ahead and buy it. On the very bottom, we actually have a receipt for tuition paid to the school. It's dated 1831. And the person who received the money for payment is someone by the name of F. Hancock. And the Hancock family owned the land where the stone church is. You might be familiar with the very old Rock Bethel church. So this represents the oldest school that we know of in the area. The Wild Horse School takes its place. We don't know if it's on the same foundation, but it's in the same general area, and it's described very similarly. And we start seeing reference to this in the 1860s through these photographs. So this school was around for a long time, probably almost 100 years. And if you didn't see on the map earlier, it's where I've circled the red circle there. So it's on the western side of Babla Park. The foundation actually sits in Babla Park. The school is no longer standing. This shows where the Wild Horse School was on a map. This was a well-traveled route that connected the southern part of the county to the ferry up by where the Boone Bridge is now. So I like to include this picture because the Dozier Schoolhouse was in Merrimack Township. It was not in Wildwood, but it really shows, it's an excellent example of an old school. It was photographed prior to 1876. It's situated about halfway between Allenton and Pacific. And what I like about this, or what is striking about this, is that it really looks rustic, and it doesn't look like a place that maybe you would think children would be running to go to every day. So it is a good example of what the earliest schoolhouses looked like. So this is the Orrville School, and you might be familiar with this. This structure is still standing. It's a private residence, and it's in the community of Orrville. I like to show this because it's so crowded. There are so many children. And one of the interesting things we know in studying this school is that in this photograph is about 1893. We know that in September of that year, there were 42 students in attendance, but that number explodes up to 64 by November. And that's mostly because these students were all, a lot of the older students were helping their families on the farm, and they had to work during harvest season. And so they couldn't attend the full school year. The teacher that's teaching, her name is Carrie Hillebrand, and she's about age 18 when she takes on this role. And she has to control from first grade up to 8th grade. And, you know, just imagine 64 students. She's very well known. She's a stepsister to Fred Essen. He's a very important person in the community. He supports a lot of education and a lot of schools. And he also becomes the county recorder of deeds, and he buys 2 newspapers in St. Louis. So this family was very involved in education in the area that's now Wildwood. One thing that's kind of unique about the Orrville School is they added on a second room, and they probably did that because it was so crowded. That was done in 1895. And in this picture, this is pretty close to how it looks today. It's a private residence off of Etherton Road. So earlier I talked about the Black schoolhouses. They started after the Civil War. And some of the history behind that is that Missouri was a slave state and it prohibited slaves from learning to read and write. After the Civil War, the Constitution was changed and they added African schools. But with the rise of Jim Crow laws, Missouri joined other southern states and they enacted legislation that actually was difficult for the African-American community to receive an education. In 1889, they passed segregationist laws that said Black children could not go to white schools and white children could not go to Black schools. So that was really the beginning of a formal segregated society. And that continued until 1954 with the Brown versus Board of Education. It took about another 10 years for St. Louis County to integrate, and that happened after the Civil Rights Movement in the 60s. So to go through some of these pictures here, you might have seen some of these before, but in the upper left is the Orrville Black School that was located in an area that is now called Westland Acres. This was a place where a lot of former slaves of the Long family purchased land and settled. And this first structure was a combined church and school for the community. The photo was taken around the 1890s. Below, you see a picture of the second schoolhouse built in that community that was built in the 1930s, and it's a wooden structure. And then I don't have a photo, but there was a third structure that was built in 1950, and that was built of kind of cinder block, and that was in operation for another 15 years. So on the right, I have a picture of one of the school teachers at the Mount Pleasant Colored School, and his name was Otis Shackelford. He taught school there in, we know, 1897. He actually goes on after this to become a well-known essayist. He becomes published and quite well known. He moves to Kansas City. He's not from the area. He came here to teach in the Mount Pleasant School. But he talks about the area. He was teaching 14 children in that school, and the term was 6 months, and he was paid $30 a month, and it was a log school. He talks about it, and it was used as both a church and a school. So it was a very similar story. But when he writes, what's unique is we have very few stories about teachers teaching and talking about teaching here. And he talks about how he was inspired when he was working here. And he actually, I have a quote there. He says, "I did my first real thinking here, and I realized for the first time the possibilities of a broader life." So it was a great experience for him. Talking about diversity, I mentioned earlier that there was a large German population in Merrimack Township, and this was not unique to Merrimack Township. St. Louis was known as with a very large German population. So some of the schools really insisted to support that German population. This is a picture of the Hollow Schoolhouse. It's located west of the village of Hollow. The structure is no longer standing. This photo was taken in the 1880s, but we know that the land was donated originally in 1869. And it was donated by someone called Henry Hankin. His farm is actually was purchased by the Wildwood Historical Society. So if you've ever been there, that was his farm. And then west of there is a little, an acre or a half acre that he donated for that schoolhouse in the area. What was important to the German community is that German be taught in the schools. And this is an example of a book that we have in our collection over at the WILWOOD Historical Society, and it's from 1894. And we know that the families were speaking German in their home, but they also wanted it to be taught in school. So they wanted the reading and the writing in full immersion in the school. So the school teachers in these areas where you had the families kind of insisting that German be part of the curriculum, the school teacher would have to be fluent in German also. So that was kind of a selection process. The school needed to have a teacher that could teach in German. So earlier, I think I mentioned about 40% of the township was German, and in certain schools they were teaching it. So one thing that changed, this went on for many decades, many generations, but during World War I, there was a rise in kind of anti-German sentiment across the United States. And it really starts in 1917 when the US enters the war. The war's been going on for several years, but we enter in 1917. And President Wilson actually restricts the use of German. So a lot of things are going on in the public space. The German press is heavily censored. In St. Louis, there were German newspapers that people that lived out here read. Libraries were pulling books from the shelves, and German Americans felt targeted. So they started assimilating more. They stopped speaking German in public and in school. And some people went to the extreme of changing their last name. A lot of things were changed, names of schools, foods were changed, streets and towns. So it was a time of transition for the area. And so German that was once taught in schools kind of came to an end then. So this is Pond School. And of all the schools, I'll probably show more from this one because I think you recently visited the school. What some people don't always know is that this was the third structure. This is located on Manchester Road. It was the third schoolhouse built called Pond School. This structure right here, that's stucco, was built around 1914, and it stayed in operation until 1951. The building was restored by the city and volunteers in 2005. And you're probably wondering where the other schools were. So the very first structure we know of was located south of Pond, and on the map you can see the red circle around it. That was the first Pond School that we know of. This map dates to 1878, so it's before the other structures were built. But the school probably dates to much older. That school becomes what was called the Pond Colored School at the time, so the Pond Black School. And we know that stays in operation till at least 1905. So up the green dot, the green circle represents where the second structure was built, and that's a wooden structure. And it was situated directly in front of the stucco structure that you've probably seen. So that is built in the 1880s. We don't have an exact date. It burned down, and that's why they built the new stucco structure that you've seen. And the stucco was intentional because it was more fireproof. A lot of wooden buildings, homes, and schools, they had a problem with them burning. This is a picture of the wooden Pond School. So imagine this being the school sitting right in front of where the stucco structure is now. It was photographed here in 1910. It was built, we think, around 1887, but we're not certain. And it was renovated in 1895. So sometime after this picture was taken, it burned to the ground. Again, in the Pond School, it was required that both German and English were taught. And that was throughout most of its existence. Another interesting fact about this school is a lot of schools were used for other kind of meeting places. And this one, in 1899, the Pond Literary Society met here every Tuesday night. So I thought that was interesting. That was actually something new I discovered since the book was published. So this is an exterior shot in 1920 of the Pond School. And a couple of comments, you can't see it in the background, but there were two outhouses. There was one for boys and one for girls. And that was considered pretty nice because usually there was only one outhouse. And another thing I noticed when I look at this picture is that it really, the current schoolhouse looks in the same shape. You know, it's really has been restored very well and it looks great. So this is the exterior. So very similar. And the stucco walls, the tile roof would have all been, you know, very good for fire prevention. This is the stone wall that sits outside of the Pond School, and you might be already aware, but in case you're not, it was built in the 1930s by the Works Progress Administration. It was part of FDR's New Deal program in response to the Great Depression. There was a lot of work done in the area that is now Wildwood, especially in Babler Park. So Pond School was like schools are now. It was the center of activities. There was a parade at least once a year that went from the school to the more social area of Grover, where there was a grove and a place for gathering, for refreshments, and for having picnics. So that was very common. This photo actually dates from 1943, so it would have been in the middle of the war, World War II. And then things like May Day parade, May Day festivities, that was really big with a lot of these schools. And graduations. At graduations, people often, especially the 8th graders that were graduating, because very few people at that time went to high school. So it was a very big celebration in the community. So now I'm going to go out a little bit and show you what was going on around Pond. So there were a lot of schools in what is now Wildwood, but I'm just going to show some of these and show how things changed and shifted over time. So the red circle you see there is the location of the Pond School, both the wooden structure and the stucco structure. And you can clearly see on the map, this map is a 1909 map. You can see the village of Pond and the village of Grover. These are all very close to where the Wildwood Town Center is now. And then in the blue circle, just below Pond, you can see that's the location of the first Pond School, and then eventually the Pond Black School. And then below that, getting closer to the railroad there, kind of connecting with Glencoe, you can see in purple, that is the location of the Glencoe Black School. And that school was established in 1886. The local residents had to fight for it. They had to go to court to get it established. And we know that the Pond School is not shown, the Pond Black School is not shown on this 1909 map. So sometime between 1905 and 1909, probably the Pond Black School had to close for some reason, maybe low enrollment, and the local Black school shifted over to Glencoe. So at the bottom of the map, you see Glencoe, you see encircled the Glencoe, it would have been the white school. And that's also multiple structures were there. The school that is, I'm sorry, the building that is still there now, it's a private residence, is probably the second structure. So I don't know if you can all see, but because depending on how your screen is, but over on the right, you should be able to see another circle, and that would be the Sappington School. And that is one of the very early schoolhouses also. And after the Civil War, the Sappingtons were Southern. After the Civil War, it gets renamed to the Ruey School. And Ruey was a judge. She actually lived near there. So that school was nearby. And then kind of up north a little, the green circle you see east of Grover, that was St. Joseph's School. But an interesting story there, it started out as St. Malachy's. It was Catholic, but most of the people in the early days were Irish. This is before the Germans came in. And so they changed the name to St. Joseph's when the saying is when the Germans overtook the Irish. That school location, they moved farther east eventually, but to orient yourself, it's where the Wildwood Schnooks is now. So that's where that school was located. So one of the things, probably one of the saddest things when I was researching the history of the schoolhouses and the people that attended was the public health issues of how highly contagious diseases were in these tight, small schools. And there were a lot of challenges there were outbreaks of measles, scarlet fever, and diphtheria. And diphtheria was very deadly. Now, there were no vaccines and there was no antibiotics. So it was a really hard period of time for children attending school. And I have two examples up here and I'll just summarize them, but one is from December in 1886. And a father has, the newspaper's reporting, his father has lost 2 children this week, and that makes 5 deaths in his family in the past 2 weeks. There are also other deaths that have occurred in the neighborhood, and this is the Hollow area. And so they've closed the school. And you hear about this a lot in the wintertime. They're closing the schools all the time because they're having outbreaks of scarlet fever and diphtheria. And then there's this other article from January in 1885 about another family where the father has lost 6 children in 5 days. He's lost all of his children in 5 days from diphtheria. So it's a very tragic time for these families. And then of course there were other things. There was cholera, there was a huge outbreak in 1849. Malaria is a constant problem until that gets cleared up, and then the flu. So I'm sure we're all aware, because of everything that's going on, the Spanish pandemic was, the biggest at the time. It lasted longer than a year. And in the end, it killed about 675,000 Americans at a time when the United States population was 1/3 of what it is now. St. Louis got a lighter case than some other cities. The city and county reported, I think, around 3,000 deaths. Most of these occurred in the last 4 months of 1918. So the deaths were actually probably higher. And most of the schools were closed for an extended period of time, from pretty much October of that fall until January. And a lot of schools would open and close and open and close. So this would go on a lot. This was very common during this time. So this is nearing the end of my presentation. I just have a couple more things, but I have this photo from Melrose School. It's on Melrose Road near the village, and it's from 1931. But the teacher on the right, her name is Mrs. Nellie Drawley. And an interesting story about her is she lived in Maplewood or Webster Groves, and she had family. Her maiden name was Connell, and she had family out here. And she taught in several different schools, but she was teaching in Melrose in 1931 and a few years after that. But in 1940, she's teaching over in the Sulphur Springs School, which is off of Manchester. And she complains to the school board that the conditions in the school are not adequate, that they need to improve them. A lot of this, it's a 1-room schoolhouse down the road on Manchester. And she gets fired. So I like to include her story because I really respect, she was fighting for her kids and for her local school. She ends up okay. She has a good story, but this is a picture of the interior of Melrose School. It's one of the few interior pictures we have. We have a lot of exterior pictures of the class posing in front of the school, but we have very few showing what it was like inside. So I always like to end on this slide because it's unique. That's Mrs. Nellie Drawley there on the left, the school teacher. She's in her 40s, and this is 1934. And you can just immediately see how crowded it is. Children are sharing desks. The older children tended to sit toward the back, but you can really see the challenges that both the students and teachers would have had. And also you can see, when I spoke earlier of some of the challenges they had with health, that it was a really big problem because inside the school, they were probably sharing a bucket of water. That was their water fountain. In later times, people would bring their own cup, but early on, they were sharing the same ladle out of that bucket that came from a well or a nearby creek. So you can really see a lot of the challenges that people had. So that is it. Any questions?
No,
Oh.
great presentation, Karen. Really appreciate that. That was very informative and reinforced my reading. So
Okay. Well, I hope there were some new things that maybe you hadn't heard of or in the book. I tend to add things as I find, as I just tend to add things. So.
Okay. I've got a couple questions. I'm just wondering, I'm not sure when the Rockwood School District or a school district out here started. I know I went through the Kirkwood schools, and the Kirkwood schools integrated in 56. And I'm not sure when the schools were integrated in this area, and where did the Black African-American children go? Were they still going to these one-room schoolhouses until that time?
Okay, so I'll try to answer the first question first about when did Rockwood. I might have it in the book. I have to tell you, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but it's in the 1950s is when they started consolidating schools. And this was a long process. It was really a 20 to 30 year process that the state board of education or the state of Missouri did not like. They felt that rural schools were not offering as good of a program as you received in cities. So there was a big push to consolidate, and the reason these one-room schoolhouses faded away is because families wanted the best education they could get, and they felt one teacher teaching 1st through 8th grade wasn't going to do it. So I would say it was sometime in the 1950s, to answer your question about Rockwood. And then the second question is, when did schools become integrated? And out here, and I would say this is probably St. Louis County in general, it didn't happen until after the Civil Rights Movement. So even though you have Brown versus Board in 1954, it doesn't happen until about 1963, 64. So those children continued going to one-room schoolhouse, African-American one-room schoolhouses out here in our community. And then in 64, they're integrated in, and two of the big schools that took Black students were Pond and Chesterfield.
That's interesting. That's fairly late. Well, at least for me it was, because that's when I was in school. So.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, Teresa?
Miss Fox, I got to tell you, this has been very, very interesting. And I thank you so much for coming in and talking to us about this. I'm 62 and I went to a one-room schoolhouse in between Rolla and St. James in Phelps County. And we didn't consolidate until 1972. So I have something very close to this presentation that you have been telling us about. And my question is, are there other people, do you know if any people still live in this area that went to some of these schools that are still living?
Yes, we take a lot of oral history at the museum, at the Wildwood Historical Society. And a lot of this information, we have a lot of oral history. And then through the book and other projects that we do, we try to back it up with primary source documents, you know, a photograph or a legal document of some kind. But no, we have a lot of stories of people that attended, definitely. We have their oral history. Mhm.
Thank you.
One more question. These schools would go up to 8th grade. What if someone wanted higher education to go to high school and to college? What did they do? Where would they go after they graduated from the 8th grade here?
So in many cases, and I actually did oral history with some people, and they explained to me there was a lot of pressure to help on the farm. So after 8th grade, for a majority of the people that lived in this area, they were helping their families in the farming community. Now, the Eureka High School is the first high school out here in this area. And, you know, that's not established till the early 1900s. And also, if you're going to attend, there was no transportation in the beginning, you would have to get yourself there. And that was almost impossible for a lot of people. So not as many people attended high school. Some families would send their children to boarding school or they'd send them into the city, but there weren't a lot of options. And that was something the state of Missouri really worked on. They worked on that. Their goal was to add more high schools. And you see that in our local community. You see, you know, Lafayette starts, and then a bunch of other schools are created through the Rockwood system.
No, that makes, I mean, it was a definite, you had to be very interested in further education at that time. And it, for many people, it wasn't necessary unless you wanted to be a teacher or a doctor or
well, the
something else.
early school teachers, they went to a very short program. It's a matter of weeks, months. But, you know, I gave that example at the Orrville School. You had Carrie Hillebrand at 18 is teaching every subject, you know, grades 1 through 8, and she's handling those kids. So it's, you know, it was very different.
Miss Fox, this is Elizabeth Broyles. I'm so grateful for your presentation.
Thank you.
I grew up in a small farming community in Northwest Missouri. I call it Missouri. And when I grew up in the 40s and 50s, there were schools out in the country. I think they went to 8th grade before they came into town to go to high school. And so I'm very familiar with that time frame. I was very young at the time, but also I know stories that my grandparents and my grandfather Broyles taught in one of those schools in the community in Mercer County, which is right on the Iowa line. And so it brings back those conversations that I had with my grandparents about them sending their children, my father and his brothers, to a one-room schoolhouse through 8th grade. Thank you.
Yeah.
And just to Teresa, my sister's mother-in-law, Marcella Pendleton, who used to be Portner, she went to the Pond School, the stucco one. So she's got some good stories about that.
Is she still living?
Yeah, she lives on Lindy Lane. So
So take down next time you're together, or I don't know if you're able to get together because of the pandemic, but write down that oral history if it hasn't already been done.
okay, we'll do.
That's what I always tell people.
Well, thanks a lot, Karen. We really
Oh,
appreciate
you're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you. It was fascinating.
Okay. Thanks.
Hey, Joe, and remind me to take that notes from my sister's mother-in-law. I've got to remember to talk to her about this.
I certainly will, sir.
Okay. So that was totally awesome. That's worth the price of being on this commission right there. So our next item is a request for exterior modifications building listed on the city's local historic register. It's located at 1537 Clayton Woods Court in Ward 2.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to have Ms. Arnett present this particular item. She's been working closely with the individuals.
Thank you. And I'll note that the contractor is on the meeting as well. I just added him to the panelists. So
That's
Justin,
Mr.
if
Adams,
I,
yeah.
I'm sorry?
Mr. Adams. He's the new face that popped up.
No, Mr. Adams, sorry, you were in the attendee panel and I couldn't see you. So sorry that I pulled him in late, but Mr. Gallman here and will is the contractor for the property. So the property is located at 1537 Clayton Woods. It's also addressed to like 300 Strecker. So this is one of the 13 properties that are listed on our local registry. I believe it was the previous owner who applied and had the property listed. There were no incentives offered. As you know, we don't have, it's a little more difficult. There's not many that we can offer in a residential setting. The homeowner at that time did not want any incentives. They simply wanted the history maintained and the property kept as an asset listed on the registry. So all properties, and it's known as the Ben Bomber House, and it was constructed in around circa 1891. So the as part of the requirements for it being on our local register and any of our properties that are of this age and on our inventory, the Historic Preservation Commission will review any exterior modifications. And so Mr. Gallman had submitted on behalf of the homeowner for the building permit, and I've worked with him very easily to kind of understand what the project is. So on the home has a 2-story deck, and so the work is on the lower level deck. There's some structural supports being completed on I believe there's some on the upper level, but also on the lower level as well. There's some tuck pointing. It's a stone foundation with a cellar that you can see in the photographs that were submitted. So, and then the main work is the decking and flooring on the first floor deck. So the property owner and what the contractor has explained and what was outlined in the report relative to its compliance is they're basically replacing like for like. So the floorboards, the color, the railings, everything on the first floor porch will basically be more stable and sturdy and new, but will match what was already there. So the decision that the commission has to make, and we went through the design criteria, is if it meets all of the design criteria, which is outlined from the Secretary of the Interior, you would issue a certificate of appropriateness by motion and second and vote for the authorization to issue the building permit. So Mr. Gallman or Mr. Vunich has anything else that they would like to add, but the department did, again, review the design criteria, found it to be in compliance on all sections, And the department is recommending the certificate of appropriateness be issued by the commission. I'd be happy to answer any questions, or again, the contractor is here, or Mr. Vunich. Thank you.
Kathy, are there, looking at the designs and the drawings, is there going to be new support footings dug for the posts?
I'll let Mr. Gallman answer that if he doesn't mind.
Sorry about that. Figuring out Zoom for the first time. One of the main issues that we noted when we first went to look at the job was that there is actually no structural support underneath that porch. There are no footings in place. What they have is the 4x4 posts are sitting on blocks, which are then sitting on rocks, which obviously is not structurally acceptable. So the entirety of the thing is starting to shift down and away from the house. So our intent is to add footings in place per the engineer's recommendations of the 30 inches by, I think it was a 10 inch or 12 inch diameter in order to get that structural stability that we need.
And the decking, the material for the decking, is it natural wood?
Yes, sir. It'll be treated lumber. No composite will be used anywhere, no plastic or vinyl or anything like that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Is the design of the railings, did you replicate? I really couldn't tell on here, replicate what was there, or what was there, was it original? Was it worth replicating?
As far as we can tell, the homeowner doesn't know exactly when the porch was put on. I believe the structure that exists right now is kind of, I think that there were 3 or 4 different additions put on. And when the porch was added, I'm not 100% sure. The homeowner wasn't sure either. Our intention is to, again, like Miss Arnett said, 1 for 1 on everything that we can. What you see on the drawing, that's just the engineer's depiction of, just so that you can see that there will be a rail, there will be balusters to the 36-inch height with the 4-inch, between the balusters and everything. Right now, it's just the wood balusters that are on there. And as far as the homeowner is concerned and myself, we're just going to take one piece off and put a newer piece on to make it look better and to make it more sturdy.
Very good.
Well, and the fact that you're actually going to have that sitting on some footings is really going to be a comfortable feeling for the homeowner, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, I'll take a motion to approve the certificate of appropriateness for this project.
I'll make the motion to approve the certificate of appropriateness for this contract.
So moved by
second.
Jim, second by Jan. All,
I second.
okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Sir, thank you for coming tonight. We do appreciate it very much.
Thank you for having me.
I'll talk with Steve tomorrow. We'll get your zoning authorization.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is a request for exterior. Well, since I've been on the commission, there hasn't been exterior modifications that I can remember, and now we've got 2 of them. This third item on the ready for action is a request for exterior modifications to a building listed on city's local inventory that's located at 1233 State Route 109 in Ward 3.
I'm going to take this one as well. And Miss Collins is the architect on the project. And thank you, Travis. We've promoted her in as a panelist as well. So this one is a little
also
different.
have Dave Monsey is a homeowner, and he should also be in the room, I think.
I don't see him unless he has called in. So we
Okay.
can authorize, yeah, whoever the call-in listener is, we'll go ahead and bring him in and hope that that's him.
Okay.
Thank you. So this one's a little bit different. This property is not listed on our historic registry, but is on our historic inventory. The date of the dwelling's construction is 1895. So as you're aware, any property over 70 with a structure over 75 years of age has been inventoried by a historical architect that we have hired, and this is included on the inventory. And this was on, obviously is old enough, it was on the original inventory done in 2015. So the Historic Preservation and Restoration Code lists that any property that is identified on the inventory, any exterior modification shall be reviewed by the commission, and the commission shall review the permit application and issue a response as to whether the property should be nominated. So that is what your all's job is this evening. It's not to necessarily act on the zoning authorization. We will issue the modification, but it's to address the any future potential nomination on the registry. So the homeowner is proposing a small addition on the north side of the property that would add a foyer and a covered porch. The department had some questions, and I'm hoping the homeowner or Ms. Collins can answer. There's a very large grand tree that is just outside the footprint of the addition. And so we have requested they investigate some more about the tree's stability and future existence after this addition. So I know the homeowner was going to have an arborist come out and look at that. So maybe Mr. Muncy can provide us more information on that as well. And we would probably seek some more information from Ms. Collins relative to the appearance of the addition. Some things were slightly unclear on the plans relative to if the foundation was a match. It's a stone foundation, and how the proposed addition will be treated. So I'll turn it over to both of them to provide that information, and then I can wrap up my presentation. Thank you.
Yes, hello.
Go ahead, Mr. Muncy.
Okay, you can hear me. I'm sorry. I didn't know that you could hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
What is the question?
If you could provide some more information, I know you had an arborist that was coming out relative to the grand tree. If you could provide us with that information, that would be helpful in our deliberations. Thank you.
Okay, Steve Whitehead with Complete Tree came out. He's the arborist, and had a long discussion on the type of tree and, what it would involve to do the addition. He was not concerned. He said if we basically followed the plan that we had, he did not feel that. He gave me some tips, like he said in excavation, if you do cross, he said, for one thing, he said most of the roots that we would cross would not be feeder roots. They would be the older roots. And he said, as long as we dealt with them like you would a tree branch, cut them off clean, he said that that should not affect it. The feeder roots are the ones that are getting all the nutrition into the tree. And he said that they've already established themselves mostly outside of that area where we're at. He said really where a lot of people misunderstand is that what really damages the root system is equipment running around on the root system within the drip edge. And he said, if you can keep the equipment out of there, he said, then you probably won't do any damage to the surface roots. And I basically told him, that we don't have to have any equipment in the drip edge. And again, he just basically said, he said, people do this all the time, as long as if you are digging and you come across roots, as long as you don't tear them up, as long as you cut them off clean, he said, you really shouldn't have a problem. It's more probably the feeder root area, which is actually outside of us, that he said he would be concerned with. And then he also said that the age of the tree, it's a sweet sugar maple. And so he said it's probably about it at its age. He said we would not, the tree would definitely not outlive us. I'm 62. And he said that really for that kind of a tree, it's pretty old anyway. It has kind of a large hole on the one side, but he basically told me how to, that I can seal that up just to keep the moisture from bothering it. And to feed the tree, he told me how to feed the tree roots. And he said it's really probably more important just to give it a good feeding once a year. And, went through that whole explanation, he said, than what we're doing. That was his opinion. And again, he was Steve Whitehead with a Complete Tree Service, and he's an arborist.
Thank you. Ms. Collins, can you address the finished materials on the addition? That would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, the foundation I know was of concern, and it was drawn as just a concrete foundation, which does not match the existing. The existing is a stone foundation. So in talking with someone at the building department, they suggested maybe putting a stone veneer if the foundation does have to match the existing. And then the exterior finishes will match the existing home, so that this looks as much as possible like it was always there. The purpose of the project is really because if you can see from the photos, the driveway comes right underneath the front of the house, and to get out of the car and kind of get in the home, there's not a lot of space right there. So we wanted to make more of a prominent entry to the home. It's easier access for the homeowners.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, did you ask me to respond?
No, sir.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Unless you had something else that you wish to add.
Oh, I was just going to add to what she said. The design now is there's 3 over height steps. The existing, to get in it, they're about almost 9 inches, and there's 3 of them that you have to come up, and there's no porch at all. So you come up 3 steep steps and then right into the front door. And then there's the area that it comes into the house. There's a wall about 4 foot away right in front of the door. So it's just very awkward. We just wanted like a more of a large entryway into the home with a small porch in front of the door that you could stand at and knock and before you entrance, and then a nice area to come into, close the door without walls being right in front of you. So that's pretty much the purpose.
Question?
Okay, we got all kinds of, so one of my initial questions is the veneer. What are your thoughts on using that veneer like your architect mentioned to make it look like a stone foundation?
Yeah, actually we were going to do that anyway. We just didn't think of, adding that into the design. There's stone. I've been to a couple different stone places, and you can actually buy the authentic stone. It's real, but it's a veneer, it's maybe 2 inches thick, looks just like what's on our foundation, existing, stone foundation. We were going to match that and try to make it look as much like it was built when the house was built as possible.
Okay, was it Jim first and then Teresa had a comment?
Okay. The finishes, natural finishes, no plastic.
Correct. Yes, we were going to use real wood on the railing and the porch, and try to make it look as authentic as possible. Again, with the end result hopefully being that you would not think that this was put on at a later date. You would think it was built when the home was built.
And the other question is, at final build out, it's all complete, how far will the structure be away from that tree?
I guess I never took the exact measurement. It's probably somewhere around, I would say, 12 to 15 foot from the tree itself. But I don't think we're going to have to trim any limbs. Everything, I guess, in the past has been trimmed so that it probably didn't grow that much towards the house, just because there's a house there already. So, I guess the larger limbs, grow more vertical in that area instead of horizontal. And so I don't think we're going to have to trim anything at all. And that was another thing the arborist said. He said, really, they found out that it's a lot more damaging to cut, to remove leaves from a tree than, he said, that's really one of the big issues. And that's something we don't have to do. We don't have to remove leaves, which is, of course, is a big, a big way that the tree is, feeds itself, obviously. So he thought that was, that was not going to affect any limbs. So that was another good thing.
Thank you.
Teresa?
Yeah, I suppose my question is similar to that about the grand tree. And last night in a meeting, Mr. Vunich and Dr. Hammer schooled me on the uniqueness of of Wildwood and our earth and our terrain and how unique it is, and that it's different than any place else around. And I was wondering if disturbing that has anything to do with the care of the tree, when, if we're close enough to do any damage to it, or if Mr. Whitehead realizes the uniqueness, and if not, maybe he could speak more with Mr. Vunich, because he's like the expert of the whole area. And I just was wondering from Mr. Vunich and Miss Arnett, if there's anything we should be aware of regarding that.
Well, Ms. Clark, from the perspective of the department, the information that's been provided by the property owner from the arborist seems to indicate that we have a fairly substantial distance between the actual construction area and the tree trunk itself. And the advice that's been given by the arborist is good advice, and advice we hear often. And so from the perspective of the department, the information provided tonight makes us feel better about the grand tree surviving the construction project.
Very good.
Okay.
Steve?
Okay. A couple things. The fact that this house is being added onto is sort of in keeping with the way so many houses out here have been added onto over the years. And I don't think an addition on a house like this is all that unique. I mean, it's in keeping with the historical nature of these houses. They're added onto as the need comes up. So, so I think that is not a problem. A couple questions. One is, I guess it's important if you're going to put a stone veneer on the foundation. There are a lot of stone veneers that look just like stone veneers, and I think it's very important that you do find a stone pattern of the size and shape pretty much that matches the existing stone foundation, which I know that's what I've got on my house. The other question is, there's the existing door into the living room. It looks like it's staying on the new plans. Is that correct? Or would you be closing that up? The existing door that's at the bottom of those steps.
Yeah, no, that would be removed positively. Yeah, we honestly I didn't notice that wasn't removed on the drawing, but yes, we're removing that and replacing the siding that's there now.
Okay.
And the steps, and those 3 concrete steps that are in front of it, which actually stick out into the driveway right now. So we're into that carport, if you want to call it. So those are going to be removed. Yes.
I think it looks like a reasonable plan to me.
Okay, so that was good information. So you're taking out the front door and putting it on this extension. That's going to be your main entry into the home, correct?
Yes.
Yes, sir. It's actually, we have a different door. The it's a 36-inch door, but it's got, lights on both sides, kind of a traditional, front door. And then we're going to, in the plans, it shows actually opening up a hole in the side of the house so that when you come in the foyer, which is roughly 8 by 9 feet, then you'll just turn to your left, and then that will be opening, totally open, the wall will. And so it'll actually become part of the living room. And then, that's the setup.
Okay, any other comments? Somebody want to make a motion?
I'll move that. This is, what do we have to approve on this? Since this is just on our hit listing, it's not historical register house. What do we have to do here?
You're just making a determination on if you would recommend it be added to the local historic registry. So should the applicant apply for the local registry to place this home on it?
So at that point, we're just asking them to go through that process?
Yes, it's just a recommendation. Any property that's placed on our registry is done voluntarily. So, but this would be as part of your evaluation of the addition if you believe the home is eligible and should be placed on the registry.
And
We have the name of the original owner or the original
I do not
occupant of the
know,
house?
sir. I do not know, sir. I don't know if it was identified in the survey form that was completed by Lynn Jossi, the consultant at
Not.
the time. It's not.
In the survey from 2014, it shows that it's likely the house owned by T.S. Burnett.
Okay.
So I
the-
guess
It's unknown. Yeah.
So there is history to the house. We can trace it back. I mean, so that's good.
Which is interesting because honestly, we did not know, we really did not know any of that. And so, we would be, definitely interested. We've actually contacted the Historical Society before and, just talked about the house. And, but we weren't aware that there was any really history in the house or didn't really know it would even qualify, to be honest with you. But we would be interested in definitely talking to the Historical Society about that.
Well, provenance is everything in history, I guess.
Okay, so the motion we'll make is just to recommend that they consider adding it to the registry, correct?
And we should,
Improvement in all.
and I would just add that, and it's a very common misconception, there is the Historic Preservation Commission, which is the group that we're talking with right now. And then there's the Historical Society, which was somewhat represented earlier in the conversation with the presenter earlier, but we are two separate groups. So this is if you've talked to the Historical Society, that is a separate group from the city. What we're proposing here or discussing here is putting it on the city's list. And we would definitely, if assuming we move forward with our proposal and the vote, encourage you to understand and learn that process. There is some requirements and discussion that goes along with that, but it's two separate groups, just to make clear.
Okay, thank you.
And the application will really, that'll establish all of you have to go through that whole history. So you'll learn a lot about the house by just putting that application together.
Okay.
Okay, so Steve, you want to move to?
Well, I would make a motion that it be considered for entering into the historical register.
Okay. We got a motion and we have a second.
Second.
Jan, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So that's just a recommendation. So there we go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you.
And hey, Joe, can we get him some of that information that's in our survey, just so he has all that information to go by?
We certainly will. We'll send him information about the registry process, the information we have on file regarding his individual survey itself, and anything else that we can provide that might help him understand what we're asking and the benefits of being part of our local register.
And we do appreciate your consideration of this. We're the commission that doesn't bite, I want to say, but we're the fun commission.
You
So
have to watch out for Mr. Scott.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm not taking any fun away from the council. The council's fun too. I used to be there, and that's always fun. And the P&Z is a fun group too most of the time, right?
But we think we're pretty special.
Hey, I wouldn't make comments like that if I wasn't one of you at one time or another.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so we've got one more item on the ready for action, the discussion on the next group of properties to be added to the historic inventory.
I'm gonna take this one too. I promise I'll quit talking.
You're on
soon
a
and
roll.
get the better.
You're on a roll,
You'll get
Captain.
Mr. Moonage, yeah. We thought we'd get me out of the way first, and then we'll finish on a high note with Joe doing the ones later. So as most of you are aware, and what we just discussed with the last property, the city completes a historic inventory, and the only qualification to be on the inventory is that the property contains a structure that is at least 75 years of age or older. So the first time we did this inventory was in 2014, 2015. We inventoried 297 properties that had reached that age limit by 2015. In 2018, we did an update to the inventory, and there were another 50 properties that were added. The first time we did the inventory, it was done by Preservation Research Office. The architect on staff was Lynn Jossie, who completed that. By the time we did the update in 2018, Ms. Jossie did not work for Preservation Research Office anymore, but we did contract with her to continue our survey, and she completed the update with the 50 new properties. So that got us through 2018. And so on the work program for 2020, you all included an update to bring us up to speed and include properties at least through 2020 that would become eligible. As we started to look at the number of properties, first of all, we were a little bit surprised. There was only one property that was has a structure built in 1944 in the city. And then there were 6 for 1945. So the department we just had a discussion and felt that it may be not worth it to add a little more than just to send someone out to do the inventory on 7 properties. So we had, we evaluated the GIS data to see for the next 2 years. And so that brought our total to 25 properties. If you all want to kind of work a little proactively and ahead of schedule, if these 25 properties would be evaluated on added to the inventory, that would cover properties built from 45 to 47. And so we would be caught up and not have to do another inventory until after 2022. So to bring this information to you, we wanted to also present you some pricing. So we reached out to 5 different agencies that were all approved by SHPO as capable and meet the qualifications to do this type of survey. So the first we did not receive a response from, and we had 2 others that responded but did not provide us a bid. So we did receive 2 bids. The first was from Preservation Research Office. Again, it would be a different architect because Ms. Jossie isn't there, but Michael Allen, the principal and owner of that company, did submit a price for the 25 25 properties. His inventory would be $5,000, which is about $200 or is $200 a property. We also received a bid from Landmarks Association of St. Louis for $2,600. So their pricing was $104 per. To give you a point of reference, in 2018, we paid $110 a survey at that time. So the department believes that both firms are qualified. Obviously, Preservation Research Office has some history with it, but we do believe that Landmarks Association would be more than qualified to do the work. And so we are supporting the lower bid of $2,600, but would like the commission's discussion, input, and recommendation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Got a question?
Yes, Steve.
In terms of the format that the previous ones were submitted, would Landmark use that same format? I mean, would like to keep some consistency unless there's a definite improvement that could be made. How do they propose, what would their report look like is
Sure.
what I'm wondering.
Sure. They were provided the existing inventory, and we noted that we want to keep it similar. We want the same format. We want the consistency within the document. And so they intend to basically match the work that was done previously. But I think it's fair to say to them, if you have an improvement or a suggestion, that we would be happy to consider it. But their proposal is to match the work already done.
Very good.
Have we reached out to any other municipalities that have used Landmark?
I have not yet, but I'm happy to do that.
Mr. Rubis, as Kathy mentioned, we contacted the State Historic Preservation Office so they could provide recommended parties to complete this task. And so we used their list. And so it's kind of a list of the best that's available. And we felt that we'd stay local, which is why most of the firms here are St. Louis based. So I guess what I'm saying is we feel the State Historic Preservation Office is the best entity to tell us who they would recommend for a task such as this.
We relied on the state office to already vet the.
Kathy, is there any reason why we wouldn't want to delay and then just push it back 2 years and not spend the money versus getting ahead of the curve? I mean, I guess it's always good to be ahead of the curve, but the option is waiting and doing them all in 2 years from now.
Sure. Well, currently we're lacking the properties that would have become eligible in 2019 and 2020. So
that's 2.
It's 7.
7. Okay.
7 properties. So
I got it.
Yeah. So we could send them out for 7. I would venture to guess that just on the return on investment, I would imagine they would charge us more to do. And so we thought instead of turning around in 2021 and having to do it again, that we would maybe just expand it a little bit since the numbers were so small.
Makes sense. Thank you.
What's their fee going to be in 2021? We might be getting a good price now that things are pretty tight with work at a lot of areas. So
actually, the price is better than we had the last time we did it. So that was something to note.
Okay. And also, it's been quite a few years now, but I have worked in the past with the Landmarks Association. They're very professional. They're very good. So, but
there's another reference, Mr. Rubis.
That's been some years ago. It's been maybe 10 years.
But will Michael Allen still come and talk it? Wasn't he supposed to be a speaker for us at our one of our?
He is. Yeah, he will be our September presenter.
Okay.
I don't know once I break the news to him.
Yeah, he may not be happy.
Yeah.
That's okay. So I think it's a fair price, and we're not getting too far ahead of the curve. I think it's being reasonable, and it is a pretty reasonable price to get this done. And it's a qualified firm. So I'll entertain a motion to approve Landmarks Association for a contract for $2,600 to do these 25 properties.
I'll second.
First, you're first.
First,
Motion from Dan, second from Chris. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Now I'm gonna go to the bullpen and you get the A team.
Can I, since we're on this topic, maybe interject real quick in terms of the criteria of 75 years? Is there a point in time where we look at evaluating that milestone as making sense going forward?
Okay.
It's a good,
And the reason being, I feel like in the next, let's say 10 years, and I could be wrong, that the number of properties starts to grow considerably. So, and maybe it's not a point of topic for tonight, but maybe future discussion too.
It's something I complained about some time ago, that I like the houses older than I am, and I think, I don't know, you get into the 40s and 50s. Yeah, I think somehow to me that's getting away from historical buildings, but maybe that's just my age.
Yeah, and I would argue that when I'm your age, then they will be. But I think it's worth having that. Again, maybe not tonight, but in the future. It's something that I think we as a group should probably try to address before whatever the potential housing boom was in this area.
Yeah. But isn't that, Joe, isn't that an ordinance that's already set, that's what it has to be unless that's changed?
it is part of the regulations that form the Historic Preservation and Restoration Code, but those can be changed. So for example, if there's a decision by a majority of the Historic Preservation Commission members that they'd like to alter that age or somehow other define it, you would make a recommendation to City Council, and it would be up to City Council then to make that determination. But it can certainly be changed based upon the direction from the commission members.
Well, I suggest we take that up in a upcoming meeting when we're it's a good discussion to have.
And if we're going to, I would ask that in some of the preparation for that, and I'm going to ask Kathy and Joe to have someone do some work on this, to be able to say, okay, what would the next 10 or 15 or 20 years look like in terms of properties becoming onto this list? I think that might give you an idea of when it becomes a potential concern.
So Joe and Kathy, yeah, when we get this prep for a discussion, just let me know and I'll with you virtually and we can kind of go through some of the information. So it's not just you all doing it. I'll help out with that.
Thank you. And just to kind of respond to Mr. Hammond's question, the first major residential development of, let's say, suburban nature was West Glen Farms, and that was around 1977.
So we got a good 20 years before we got to worry about this.
Well, the numbers may not be substantial, but your point's well taken. The houses aren't going to necessarily look like the majority of them or the asset like them on the inventory now.
Sorry for the diversion.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for bringing that up though, Chris. That's something we should address. Okay, so we got some old business. We got 3 items ready for action. One's a discussion on the proposed community legacy submittals to the state of Missouri for the bicentennial separate celebration.
Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'll begin.
It's all yours, Joe.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chair and members of the commission, the Department of Planning has prepared for your consideration tonight the final drafts of the 3 community legacy program areas that the city would like to submit to the Missouri Bicentennial Commission for the upcoming celebration. As you know, these 3 locations were chosen by the commission from a list that was developed through discussions with the commission members and city staff. Ultimately, Old Pond School, which you saw tonight in Ms. Fox's presentation, the Glencoe area in conjunction with the Merrimack River Valley, and then finally Gumbo Flats, now known as Chesterfield Valley, were the 3 that were selected. At our meeting in June, the drafts of these were provided to the commission members with the instructions and requests that you all review them if you would and provide any comments. To those that provided comments, we appreciate it very much. Those comments, for the most part, I believe have been included in the drafts that are before you tonight. Acknowledging that, the Department of Planning is respectfully requesting if there are any further comments, they be provided as soon as possible. And if not, the drafts be authorized to be submitted to the Missouri Bicentennial Commission. Mr. Chair and members of the commission, Ms. Arnett and I will be available for any comments or questions. Thank you.
Okay, I'll seek a motion to approve submittal of these 3 program submittals. Dan makes the motion. Second by Jan. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. We're submitting them.
Mr. Chair, if I may, Ms. Fox probably had one of the best pictures of Old Pond School I've seen.
Mhm.
And that was part of her presentation tonight. So I'm thinking, if I'm ever going to get a photograph of myself taken, I'm going to have her do it.
Yeah, those were some good pictures.
They really were. They were excellent.
Okay, and we got item 2 is a discussion on a request for proposals for the design of Route 66 trailhead.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the Historic Preservation Commission, as has been discussed in the past amongst the members, the city of Wildwood now owns a half-acre parcel of ground in the historic community of Grover. It was part of a subdivision development called Grover Crossing and intended to be 2 small commercial buildings. The commercial nature of Manchester Road hasn't been as robust as the property owner had hoped. And through that process of discussion with the property owner, the Manchester Road Phase 3 streetscape project, that property owner eventually said to purchase it. Knowing its location on the Mother Road, historic Route 66, and the need for additional land area for our streetscape project, a decision was made to enter into negotiations. Ultimately, the city did purchase it, and now it's available public space. With that purchase, the property and discussions about the concept for its development were presented to this commission. Immediately, the commission focused on Route 66. And so over the course of a couple of meetings this year, we've talked about how we would like to achieve a trailhead type facility with limited parking, but that would accentuate Route 66. And it's important to note that Manchester Road at this location is the original location of Route 66, not one of those that came later in time as changes occurred. The direction of the commission was to prepare a request for qualifications so that interested firms, consulting firms, could submit proposals about their qualifications, and that those qualifications then could be reviewed by the commission members. Once a firm is selected, then that firm could be brought into a commission meeting and discussion could proceed from there about their vision for the site. And then ultimately, if they are recommended by the commission, we would go into negotiations regarding cost. So tonight you have a draft of the request for qualifications. And that draft is a standard format that we've used in the past that has been successful. But the department is seeking 2 items from the commission members tonight. First, any comments on the draft. And then secondly, after comments, if there are not many in nature, a motion, a second, and a vote to proceed forward with the release of the request for qualifications so we can begin collecting our responses and then have this hopefully to the commission this year still, 2020, and then make it part of our budget process for fiscal year 2021. So again, if you have suggestions, revisions, deletions, any type of changes, this is the opportune time. And if there are a lot of them, we'll have it back in September. If not, if you all feel comfortable, we can get it ready and publish it, advertise it, and see what response we get. Thank you.
I just had one initial comment. And,
Yes.
and since I was going to kind of abstain from all this, but I'm not with my old company anymore, so I don't have to worry about that anymore. So I'm all yours from here on out.
Great.
This is a passion of mine. This whole this trailhead in historic Route 66. But the one thing I did note was community engagement going to be in here, or wasn't going to go through us to engage the community on concepts and the work that the consultant would do on this?
Yes. And if you'll bear with me, for example, at the bottom of page 1, I speak that along with a broad understanding, and this is referencing the respondent, must also have experience in general and specific approaches to public outreach to gain input and comments on the developed concepts and final selection or selections for future consideration. So what I was hoping to achieve is it would not necessarily be a broad public outreach, but certainly could. But when the property was purchased, City Council was very clear that those residents that live in the subdivision that's part of Grover Crossing be integral into anything we would do relative to this particular property. Beyond them, the area is primarily commercial. But I think it would be beneficial if we brought in other property owners, both commercial and residential, that actually are part of Route 66 and have established ties to it, such as the Big Chief, the owners of Pond Inn, etc. So I think I was thinking more of a targeted approach instead of opening it up community-wide. But certainly that could change, and that could be a part of the request for qualifications. Thank you.
Chris,
So,
sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So I guess my question, there's not a whole lot of direction here in terms of what the vision for the park would be. Is the expectation that the submitter would provide that direction? And I guess there's 2 points of direction. One, that it's mentioned a couple times about the Mother Road and Historic Route 66, which has been the big draw selfishly for myself and Paul in terms of our thoughts around this. But the other part of it is this notion of a trailhead. And I guess I question calling it a trailhead. I think I understand the approach, but really there's no trail there, right? But are there sidewalks that are being added as part of the the Manchester redesign and bike lanes? Is that the kind of desire to call it a trailhead, is the bike lanes and the sidewalk?
Yes, Mr. Hammond. The Phase 3 streetscape will continue to continue the existing bike lanes through this section. And we will be also adding the sidewalks, the larger width sidewalks that are more prevalent on our new urbanism streets versus our more traditional subdivision streets. So that's why the trailhead kind of moniker was provided. In terms of how you define parks, there's like pocket parks, mini parks, neighborhood parks, community parks, regional parks, national parks. So obviously it could be a mini park or it could be let's say a pocket park, but
Or roadside park, or street side park.
certainly. But I thought the intent when we talked initially was we were hoping to do something that could bring bicyclists here, have the bicycle racks, things along those lines. And this would be a point of departure for them, but it could be anything you all choose.
I agree with that approach. I'm trying to understand where the wording, and I guess maybe just the trailhead facility aspect provides that, but other than that, where's that intention kind of verbalized here?
Well, along with the text that you have before you tonight, we'll provide them information we have on file, an aerial photograph, topographic information, the plat that created it, and the hidden treasure. There is an underground detention system that is on approximately 1/4 to 1/2 of the property, which limits a lot of what we can do with it because we have to preserve that system of stormwater management. So that was to be attached to all of this. And basically, once a qualified firm sees it, they'll know that they're not dealing with, let's say, a greenfield, but something that has some restrictions associated with it. But again, from your all's perspective, we're here to basically do what you direct. And if you have a different approach or a different name, let's get it done and we can revise the proposal and have it back in September.
Dan, did you have a comment? And then Elizabeth?
Yeah, regarding the bike lanes, since there are no official Wildwood trails through that area, could we consider those bike lanes being informational enough, directional enough to take us to those existing Wildwood trails? So in other words, they're self-leading almost.
Definitely. A project that is in easement and land dedication acquisition is a true trail system from State Route 109 on Manchester Road. That'll go by Old Pond School and connect out to Pond Road where we have existing trails in that vicinity. And if you go to the east, the bike lanes will connect to the pedestrian bridge, the first pedestrian bridge, and that gets you onto the Wildwood Greenway corridor, which are the multiple use trails 100. Also, then it takes you into Ellisville, pretty far distance before you end up on Manchester Road near Clarkson, where it becomes just a street and sidewalk and stabilized shoulders. So there's the connection all around, at least to the what I would describe the east and west. Not necessarily to the north with Etherton Road. We don't have that connector to the north yet, but we are working on it.
Perfect.
Almost creates a whole Route 66 bikeway system. And it's part trail, part on-street bike lanes, part shoulders. And then we got that section of old Route 66, the original section that can get over to the trails along 100 also.
Yes, and when we've had proposals suggested on that parcel of ground where the original pavement of Route 66 is still existing, we've always told them that's a protected area, take it or leave it. If you want the project to even be considered favorably from the, to have any even a chance of being considered favorably, that's a no-touch zone.
Could you explain
Elizabeth?
that no-touch zone again, Joe?
On the Wedge property that's farmed by Manchester Road and Route 100 on the easternmost end, there is actually a section of Route 66 that's the original pavement,
Okay,
and it's been preserved. Developers have looked at that property on and off for years, and when we as the department meet with them, we always advise them that's just not going to go away. You can't remove it. You can't build on it. It's got to be preserved and more, and for all intents and purposes, dedicated to the city. Now, we're working with a lady named Karen Yeomans, who is the Southwest Area Superintendent for the Missouri Department of Transportation, trying to figure out if that was transferred to St. Louis County when MoDOT relinquished Old Manchester Road or Route 66. She retired and we haven't been able to kind of pick it up. The new gentleman that is now the Southwest Area Engineer, he's kind of hit the ground running pretty hard, I think, and we're going to get back to that as soon as we can.
Well, in general, I think that, you know, that, oh, yeah, Elizabeth.
that wasn't really what I was going to speak about, but I did want to ask that question. There are cyclists, as you all know, some of you are cyclists. My husband is quite the cyclist as well. And the only section that enters the south is through going west on Manchester Road and then through Rockwood Reservation. And there are many cyclists that go through that area. So that's not involved with the name Route 66 Trailhead, but it is an avenue south to other trails. And we just didn't speak about that.
Thank you.
Most people probably know that already.
It's always good to say it again, though.
Right.
Yes, Steve?
Question, what do we see, or at least this is what I see for the park, is a place for a couple parking places, information about the trail, about Route 66 and the trail along there, as well as a break area, like a picnic table, someplace to sit down. Is that what we're really looking at there? That would be my thought.
Well,
and what I really would like to see, what I think would be neat, is a 3-dimensional map of 66 going through Wildwood that would see it. You could see the buildings on it, the roads up and down, and where it could go. I think it'd be you see these old dioramas when you go to these various historical places of battles. I'd like to see one of those for the Route 66. It'd have to be made out of concrete. It wouldn't be paper mache for being outside, but something like that would interest people in. This is 66 through Wildwood, and it's a place to start out and find out where you're going and a place to park a couple cars.
So Joe, one of the things I think you could add to this is maybe for the consultant to meet with this group to start off at, right when they get at the kickoff almost, to get the ideas, some of what Steve mentioned and Elizabeth mentioned and others, Chris and I, let us, do it, talk about, some of these things that we're thinking about so they can take it all in. And then that's going to give them a really good foundation to build a couple concepts for us and then bring it back. Teresa?
Yeah, I was wondering, Joe, if you could just give us, other than this no-touch area, if you could just tell us what you think the potential bottlenecks or the opposition or the the greatest problem might be associated with this project, and when it would happen. Are we looking at next year? Are we looking at 2025? When are we looking at doing that? And do we have a way to pay for it?
All good questions. The bottleneck that I see primarily is just ensuring that the park itself, whether it's a trailhead, a roadside location, does not negatively impact the property owners in Grover Crossing, the adjoining subdivision. As I mentioned, that was a key component of City Council's concerns about the purchase. And the two ward representatives met with several of the owners, the representatives, and they were supportive because they prefer to have a public facility such as a trailhead or whatever it may be called versus commercial buildings.
Mhm.
So I think just working with the residents to ensure that whatever we end up doing gets their seal of approval. In terms of timeline, I truly believe that given the size of the structure and the availability of buildable area, this is a project, if we were to get a proposal, a firm on board, we would do it in 2021, spend much of 2021 doing the planning, design, and engineering, much of which would be overseen by the Historic Preservation Commission, and then finally budget it in 2022. I think it's critical to note that for many years, particularly since around 2013, a lot of our capital improvement plan funds that were dedicated for parks and trails went to community park. And the projects over there were in the millions of dollars. The direction we've gotten from City Council of late is let's leave community park alone for a while. We've made a lot of progress there. And let's start looking at revitalizing some of our older facilities and looking at smaller projects like this. So I would give an estimate of 2021 for the paperwork and 2022 to actually see it constructed.
Elizabeth, one more.
Yes, I know that we talked about this evening having a couple of parking spaces there. I know what the ground looks like and it's quite small. My concern is that we want to build more retail on and encourage more retail on Manchester Road. And my concern is that if you put a lot of parking spaces, more than two, you're going to have people parking in there and walking to a different destination rather than being on a bike. So I think that's a consideration we need to think about. And I really, Steve, love your idea of the three-dimensional sign. I think that's a really big draw. And in my opinion, I think we should never slight Route 66 as a title to this trailhead.
Okay. Oh, wouldn't any commercial development, wouldn't they be required to provide adequate parking for each development? So I don't think that this would be usurped by those groups. I don't know. Is that Joe can answer that? What's the zoning requirement for commercial along there in terms of parking?
3 spaces for every 1,000 square feet of leasable space. But yes, we require a commercial use to be able to park itself in combination with on-street, because phase 3 of the Manchester Road Streetscape project will have some on-street parking and then off-street parking. And that's where the majority of the spaces will be as part of the development itself. But I do have a kind of fun fact. When the City Council was discussing the purchase of this particular property, we were also discussing at Economic Development Committee providing a municipal lot somewhere on Manchester Road to assist businesses like The Porch, Three French Hens, that at that time were bringing in large crowds with kind of a group sales, and they were shuttling them from other locations. So there was some support at City Council of actually having a few more parking spaces here so it could act at least provide a little bit of relief. Obviously not enough for Three French Hens when they have one of their major sales events.
Joe, is it too late to consider parallel parking along the frontage of this plat? In other words, cut into the sidewalk and reroute the sidewalk around 6, 8, 10 parking spots? Seems like a parallel approach in that short amount of space would be better than trying to stand them on the lot itself.
There will be on-street parking as part of phase 3. Parallel spaces take a little more room than, let's say, angled. We can get more angled spaces than we can parallel.
Okay.
But like I say, these are all good questions. And that's why in the request for qualifications, whatever firm is chosen by the commission members, I mentioned concepts because I think they could just be simple concepts, some even hand drawn, just to kind of start thinking about what's it look like with 2 spaces? What's it look like with 6? What's it look like this, that? And so I thought the best approach for all of you is let's not just focus on one that for the most part, the consultant may think, oh, this is the best approach, but let's see some concepts based upon, as Paul said, what you all kind of give them as part of your thoughts. If you were to build this yourself, what would you want there?
Yeah, and when we get into the negotiations as far as actual scope, we can put in there 1, 2, 3 concepts to come up with, and they're very visual concepts, not detail, but it'll give us the idea of okay, what goes where and no parking, and they're a mix of that, and we can plug and play different elements of each of the concepts too, which I just got done doing on Argonne down in Kirkwood.
Okay.
As far as a whole plan for that corridor between Taylor and Clay, and the property owners along that street ended up picking the stuff they liked most out of it to move forward with. So I think the RFQ is in pretty good shape to get us be able to select a firm off of, and it's really all based. We're not talking about price. We're just talking about qualifications. So I certainly think that all this will lead us to the right firm that we want to, we want to work with on this project. Somebody else had their, Teresa?
Yeah, I just wanted to interject something that maybe we can think of ahead of time. And I know this is getting to a detail, but if we could think of it ahead of time, I think it would be a good idea because I think the requirements are going to change in the next few years. And that is if we put in informational signs to make sure that they are in Braille also. I know that the ADA right now is really cracking down on making sure that all educational videos made by government entities or public schooling have closed captioning because that is requirement by the law. So, we have to do that ourselves. And I see that the Braille is going to come the same way in the next few years.
Ms. Clark,
that's why I wanted my 3D map of Highway 66.
Okay, Joe.
We could certainly bring that up to the chosen consultant, and I'd be disappointed if we didn't do it.
Okay, so okay, Chris, one more comment.
No, I was going to add a comment. I was going to move to
There we go.
accept the, this paperwork submitted by the department for moving forward.
Okay, a second.
I'll second it.
Okay, Steve seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
You're reading my mind, Chris. That's exactly where I was going to go.
Thank you all.
Okay, and so the last item is update on the 2020 work program.
Well, again, Mr. Chair, thank you. Mr. Chair and members of the commission, I am aware that we're over our 2-hour limit. So I am going to just highlight a couple of items, and then Ms. Arnett and I will be glad to answer any questions and respond to your comments. First and foremost, number 2 on the list of our work program, we've made a decision tonight to proceed forward with landmarks, and we'll get that underway starting next week and contact the principal that submitted the proposal. I do want to bring up the last of the historic markers. The bridge project that we've been waiting for is nearing completion. The roadway is to be open no later than Monday, August 31st. The bridge project has drawn a lot of scrutiny of late, and some of it has to do with the impact of the bridge on the historical community. So I want to apologize to all of you that you didn't get to see the bridge project. It's not something that was readily circulated, but at the end of the day, the bridge will provide safe access across a portion of Bonham Creek, and by its nature, we'll be able to finally install our community marker and the last of the 11. As you know, we've canceled almost all of our events for 2020 due to COVID-19. I do want to inform you that the WILWOOD Celebration Commission, that standing committee with the responsibility to make determinations regarding the celebration, has chosen to move it to April of 2021. And it'll be on April 23rd and 24th. And that was when we'll be able to probably do the most promotion of the Wildwood History book. Ms. Arnett and I are working on 2 major components of that. The points of interest map, which has been issued each year with the new chapters, and then the incorporation chapter itself. So mark that on your schedules, April 23rd and 24th, 2021. Along those lines, we are still making progress down at Bellevue Farms Park off of St. Paul Road. Friends of Bellevue, a not-for-profit organization primarily of Sherman residents, have been doing invasive removal of honeysuckle and other items. The city has been assisting on cleanup as well as helping them obtain a grant. And so I'd like to schedule something once we get into the fall to take you back down there. Some of you have not seen it. Some of you have, but I think you'll be surprised how much different it looks based upon the volunteers out of the Sherman community. It's pretty impressive stuff, and I'd like you to get to see it. I'm thinking when it's cooler, and maybe when the leaves turn, it'll be a great opportunity to take some nice photographs down there and really enjoy a portion of the Merrimack River Valley. And then finally, I do want to mention that we've added onto the work program Portner Park. We will be taking to City Council at its next meeting on September 14th a resolution for the survey work. We are finalizing the selection of the environmental consultant for the phase 1. And then we already have the ordinance authorizing the acceptance of the donation from City Council. And so I'm thinking too, this fall, we will be able to take you out there and you can explore the 27 acres that was so graciously donated by Joanne Yost. And so this fall, put on your boots, maybe spray down with some bug repellent, but be prepared. We're going outside.
And we can social distance.
Of course. 27
And when we
acres.
can't,
should be
have your
able to.
mask.
Okay. 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 What? I think in terms of Bellevue Farms, we owe a round of thanks to Gorp, because it wasn't until they got interested in doing something there that it woke up the people that lived around there, and they really got busy doing something, because Gorp was ready to move in the next week and start putting in trails.
It's a very astute observation. And like
Yes.
I say, and there's just a great group of people. They had planned this April, Friends of Bellevue, to have a barbecue and a band and some adult beverages. And it was going to be a fundraiser. Obviously, it got canceled because of COVID-19. But when they reschedule it, I'll make sure you're all invited, because they're just nice people to be around, and they really are working hard down there. And I can't wait to get you down there.
Can I ride my bike there?
There is a gravel road, and we are doing a little clearing to get down to the spring.
Okay.
What Friends of Bellevue have figured out, which I think is very intelligent on their part, if they want to raise money and get people interested, they need to take them to some of the more interesting areas on the property. So
yeah. Okay. I don't have any questions. Anybody else have any questions, or can we adjourn this thing? Chris?
I'd just like to request that the messaging back to Mrs. Fox is very positive, and very much appreciated her session tonight.
if you would like, we can author a letter of thank you and then have the chair sign it on your behalf.
Yes. As a secretary, I would ask that the city send her a very nice letter of thanks.
We certainly will.
Let me know. I'll come by and sign it, or I can scan it and send it to you. Jan?
I have one question of Joe and Kathy. There was a lot of talk about the requirements to have a home put on the city's registry. And since I've been on, I don't think this has happened. And I'm not familiar with the requirements. Is there a way we could get a listing or a copy of the application just for our own information?
Certainly. Ms. Arnett or I or both of us will get you the packet that we're going to send to the gentleman that owned the property on State Route 109. So you can see what he's looking at the same time.
Very good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Well, thanks. Thanks everybody for attending tonight. Sorry it went over, but there's too many good things we got to talk about.
We had to make up for last month.
That's
Yes,
right.
yes.
I would move to adjourn.
I'll second.
By Chris, second by Jan. All in favor? Aye.
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 Thanks, Joe and Kathy, for hosting this rowdy bunch.
And thanks to Travis Newberry for being
Thanks,
our
Travis.
safety net. And thank you all for attending. As I say, we can't do this job without you all. So thank you.
Well, we can't do it without you. So thank
Exactly.
Or Travis.
you. With
or
you and
some other
Kathy.
people.
It's not just you. Kathy's really doing all the work, I think.
She is. I make no bones about it. And Mr. Newberry isn't far behind.
But you look good, Joe. You look good.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody.
Very good.
night.
Thank you.
Good to see everyone.
Good night.
Good night.